students, how are you? I hope you are fit and fine. Yesterday we have studied the first part of this story, The Cob and the Anthem. As you all know, it is written by O. Henry, the wonderful author. Today we are going to start the second part of this story, which is also very interesting. So let's move to the second part of the story, The Cob and the Anthem.
The first part of the story we have studied, The Cob and the Anthem by O. Henry. In this story, a man longs for something strange, something he thinks he needs to be arrested. Ever heard the saying, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it? The main character of this story is the epitome of that saying. We all think we want or need something. We sometimes even get desperate for it, sometimes, though it is exactly what we never wanted. In The Cob and in the Anthem, Soapy thinks the best thing for him is to be arrested. Does he ever get what he wants? Is it really what he wants? Now, here in the first part of the story, you have already seen it. It's the beginning of fall in New York. Soapy is on the bench at home, which is Madison Square. He is a homeless man who is in the despair at the thought of the winter coming. He will no longer be able to keep warm under newspaper. He starts to think of the alternatives. He knows that a shelter in the city will board him, but there are so many questions. He set his mind on going to Blackwell Island, or the island as he refers to it. The island is an easy enough place to get to. All he has to do is get himself arrested. Shelter, food, rules, warmth, and no questions. So Soapy sets out to make his way to the island. Now we just move to the second part of the story. In this second part of the story, we will see the 3 points which are given in this book. Soapy does his best to be on the wrong side of the law. He tries 3 tricks, all in vain. The fear that no cop will ever catch him makes him sick at heart. Now I am going to read the few paragraphs which are given in the second part of the story. There were many easy ways of doing this. The most pleasant way was to go and have a good dinner at some fine restaurant. Then he would say that he had no money to pay, and then a cop would be called. It would all be done very quietly. The cop would arrest him. He would be taken to a judge. The judge would do the rest. Soapy left his seat and walked slowly out of Madison Square to the place where the great street called Broadway and Fifth Avenue meet. He went across this wide space and started north on Broadway. He stopped at a large and a brightly lighted restaurant. This was where the best food and the best people in the best clothes appear every evening. Soapy believed that above his legs he looked all right. His face was clean, his coat was good enough. If he could get to the table, he believed that success would be his. The part of him that would be seen above the table would look all right. The waiter would bring him what he asked for. Now I am going to explain. In the previous class, we learnt how Soapy planned to spend his winter nights and days. He had thought of the various plans, but most appropriate one was the Blackwell prison plan. He would easily spend the winter months there and without anyone asking any question. Now was the time to put the plan at work. Soapy was a person who was well versed in this kind of act because it had been several years that he had been doing such things. He knew different methods of doing things in order to get to the prison. But his favorite way of executing his plan was to visit a good restaurant and have a good dinner. And it was a plan that when he would be asked to pay for the meal, Soapy would just say that he was a poor man without any job or money and he was unable to pay the bill. The restaurant authority would then get agitated at the behavior and in order to punish Soapy would immediately call the cop and have him arrested, who would arrest him and present Soapy before the judge, who in due time executed the final section of Soapy's plan by ordering him to be locked up into the Blackwell jail for 3 to 4 months, which would give Soapy ample time to see away the winter season and the cold in a cozy prison cell where he would get food at the same time. With the plan running in his mind, Soapy decided to move on and put his plan into action. He quietly got up from the park bench and, thinking about his plan slowly, moved out of the Madison Square to the famous Broadway street, the Fifth Avenue meet. He was now standing in the front of the most renowned places in the New York City. There could be no other place better than this to execute his plan. Walking a little further, he was now standing in front of a bright, large, and a very good restaurant. He was at the most famous restaurant where all the rich and famous people from the New York City gathered to have dinner in their fancy and rich clothes. Soapy was also ready to move into the restaurant and now started to assess his clothes and overall personality, whether he was able to enter the restaurant or not. It did not matter whether he had money or not. He must look presentable. If he wanted to enter such a big restaurant, he took a look his cloth, and his clothes above his waist were good and could easily pass the eyes of the restaurant people. His coat was in good condition. His face also looked clean. He would surely get inside the restaurant and get a table to sit, and we would surely get all the order the waiter to bring him to eat for the dinner. His supper appearance was good enough to persuade the waiter to accept him as any other respected customer and also serve him as he wished. He began thinking of what he would like to eat. In his mind, he could see the whole dinner. The cost would not be too high. He didn't want the restaurant people to feel any real anger, but the dinner would leave him filled and happy for the journey to his winter home. But as Soapy put his foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter saw his broken old shoes and the torn clothes and covered his legs. The strong and ready hands turned Soapy around and moved him quietly and quickly outside again. Soapy turned off Broadway. It seemed that this most easy way to the island was not to be his. He must think of the some other way of getting there. At a corner of 6th Avenue was a shop with a wide glass window, bright with electric light. Soapy picked up a big stone and threw it through the glass. People came running around the corner. A cop was the first among them. Soapy stood still and he smiled when he saw the cop. Now I am going to explain. Soapy's first part of the plan was now complete. His attire was passable for the plan, and now the second part was to be put into working. The food, Soapy was cunning man. He was thinking of what kind of food was acceptable for him to order in the restaurant. If he ordered something expensive, the restaurant authority would get real angry. And in return, he might get a very harsh beating and also a longer punishment for 6 to 12 months, much more than he would ever wish for. So, even to order a correct amount of food was necessary for proper execution of his plan. While planning, he was also feeling hungry at the same time. His mouth watered at the thought of the delicious recipes which he was to order when he got into the restaurant. Soapy only wanted to have or order only that much of food which would keep him filled up for the journey to the Blackwell Island, which was to be his winter home for this winter. Things were not supposed to turn up as Soapy had planned. Planning, planning was good, but all other things, the clothes and the personality, were not supportive to the Soapy's plan. Because the moment he stepped into the restaurant, one of the head waiter saw the torn shoes of an Soapy's feet and quickly realized that this was one person who was here to fool the restaurant in providing him a meal. Here was a man who would not have anything to pay after a handsome meal at the restaurant. The head waiter quickly realized what Soapy's plans were by seeing the torn shoes and the torn trousers which he wore while entering such an expensive restaurant. The waiter grabbed Soapy by his hand and quietly but strongly turned him out of the restaurant out in the street once again. The first and initial part of his plan was gone wrong. Securing a meal at an expensive restaurant at zero cost has failed. Soapy was tried his plan at the most expensive locality. Now here you can see Soapy was tried his plan at the most expensive locality in New York City, the Broadway. But luck was not on his side. He would move he would have to find some other place to try out his plan. His plan of reaching the Blackwell Island was not going to be through Broadway. This was for sure in the case of the Soapy. He would have to think of the different place to try out his plan. He walked along and reached the 6th Avenue. Here was a shop with a big glass window and bright, shiny electric lights all around. Here was his chance to try out his plan, Soapy thought, and picking up a big stone from the ground, send it crashing into the glass of the big window of the shop. At the terrible sound of the glass breaking had people running at the spot from and outside the shop, and in that crowd was a cop also, who reached the scene of the broken window. Soapy looked at the cop and smiled at the satisfaction of fulfillment of his plan. He was sure that the cop would now arrest him and present him before the judge, and eventually he would reach the Blackwell Island for the rest of the winter season. This image you can see how he met the cop. Now let's move to the next paragraph. Where's the man that did that? Asked the cop. Don't you think that I might have done it? Said Soapy. He was friendly and happy. What he wanted was coming towards him. But the cop minds would not consider Soapy. Men who broke window do not stop there to talk to cop. They ran away as fast as they can. The cop saw a man further along the street running. He ran after him, and Soapy, sick at heart, walked slowly away. He had failed 2 times. Across the street was another restaurant. It was not so fine as the one on Broadway. The people who went there were not so rich. Its food was not so good. Into this Soapy took his old shoes and his torn clothes, and no one stopped him. He sat down at the table and was soon eating a big dinner. When he had finished, he said that he had no money. Get busy and call a cop, said Soapy, and don't keep a gentleman waiting. No cop for you, said the waiter. He called another waiter. The 2 waiters threw Soapy upon his left ear on the hard street outside. He stood up slowly, one part of at a time, and beat the dust from his clothes. Prison seemed only a happy dream. The island seemed very far away. A cop who was standing near laughed and walked away. Soapy started moving again. When he stopped, he was near several theaters. In this part of the city, streets are brighter and hearts are more joyful than in other parts. Women and men in rich warm coats moved happily in the winter air. A sudden fear caught Soapy. No cop was going to arrest him. In this picture, you can see how the waiter moved him out. Now I am going to explain. The cop was here, quick to react to any crime that took place, and seeing Soapy on the scene asked, "Where is the person who did this awful act of breaking the window?" Soapy was sure that this time the cop is ready to arrest the person who had done this, and assured that he would surely be arrested. Asked the cop, "What make you what makes you think that I did not commit this crime? Because there is no other man around." He was trying hard to get arrested. But the cop was not convinced and informed Soapy that there is no doubt that you did this act, because anyone who did this crime would not remain standing here but instead run away from the crime scene after committing it. The cop's eyes were searching for the person who had done this, and a little far away he saw a person running away and thought that it was the culprit. And leaving Soapy standing near the broken window, took off to catch the man whom he thought to be the culprit. Soapy stood there struck with dejection and surprise. He felt cheated yet again. His plan was failed twice. Glancing around, Soapy saw that there was a restaurant just across the road, which did not look very expensive and ordinary. Folk visited and expensive and had food in this place. Soapy took his chance with the restaurant. Nobody stopped him in getting into the restaurant with his stone shoes and trousers on. He went inside and had a very good dinner. When the waiter asked for the payment of the bill, he told them that he had no money to pay for the meal. "Call the cop," he asked the waiters. But the waiters had other plans. They refused to call any cop, but instead gave Soapy a beating and threw him out on the road. Soapy got up slowly, pulling himself together and cleaning the dust from his clothes, and thinking that the Blackwell prison and its comfort were very hard to get, because everything that he tried was not working. Good for him, even a cop was at the scene. He seemed to enjoy the whole event of Soapy's getting a rough treatment at the hands of the waiters. He laughed and moved along about his job. He kept on moving from street to street, passing various bright lit areas of the New York City. In these areas, just like the bright street, the people were also joyful and bright in their hearts. They could be seen all around with rich clothes and happy hearts. All around the street in the winter nights, everything looked so nice. But when he thought of the fast approaching winter, he was troubled, and a heartbreaking fear come over him when he thought that he was not going to be arrested by any cop. His plan for the Blackwell prison had failed, and he would not get a cozy bed to sleep in and food to fill his stomach all the winters. All this thought made him even more weak and tired from winter. In the next part of the story, we will talk about Soapy tries his luck twice again, but cops remain indifferent as ever. Soapy is suddenly reminded of his childhood home and mother and resolved to return over a new leaf. Feeling a hand on his arm, Soapy turns around to see the broad face of Cop. Soapy sets out to make his way to the island. He knows of a fancy restaurant on Broadway where elitists eat. He will go there, order dinner, and inform them that he has no means to pay for it. They will have him arrested, and the judge will give him 3 months for certain. It seems simple enough, so he goes ahead to the restaurant. He's already decided what to order. He won't rack up too high of a bill, just enough to fill himself and get arrested. Unfortunately, the head waiter spots him as he walks in with his torn clothes and messed up shoes. He is immediately escorted out onto plan B. So today we have read that one plan was failed and he moved to the another plan. While walking on 6th Avenue, he breaks a glass window with a stone, making sure a cop was close enough to be first on the scene. The cop asked Soapy where the culprit was. Amazed, Soapy asked why the cop doesn't think it was him. He realizes that wrongdoers don't just wait for the cops after committing a crime. The cop chases someone else and Soapy walks away. He is failed again and again. His next plan is to dine and not dash in not so upscale joint. He eats, he tells them he has no money, and instead of calling the cops, two waiters pick him up and physically toss him out in the back alley. Now Soapy is feeling like his plan to spend winter in prison is a dream. Just then, he spots a refined looking woman standing in earshot of a cop. Now, from here, we can see the third part of the story will begin, and this we will see tomorrow.
Soapy left his bench and strolled out of the square and across the level sea of asphalt and halted at a glittering cafe. Soapy had confidence in himself from the lowest button of his vest upward. He was shaven, and his coat was decent, and his neat, black, ready-tied, four-in-hand is a kind of knot, had been presented to him by a lady missionary on Thanksgiving Day. Lady missionary means a woman working for charity, probably a nun. If he could reach a table in the restaurant, unsuspected success would be his. The portion of him that would show above the table would raise no doubt in the waiter's mind. A roasted mallard duck, thought Soapy, would be about the thing, with a bottle of Chablis and then Camembert, a demi-tasse and a cigar. $1 for the cigar would be enough. The total would not be so high as to call forth any supreme manifestation of revenge from the cafe management. Manifestation means show, and yet the meat would leave him filled and happy for the journey to his winter refuge. Here, Soapy decides to eat well, but not so expensive as to raise suspicion or caused the hotel management to take severe action, but just enough to get arrested as planned. But as Soapy set foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter's eye fell upon his frayed trousers and decadent shoes. Strong and ready hands turned him about and conveyed him in silence and haste to the sidewalk. Conveyed means transported. Soapy turned off Broadway. Broadway is a famous street in New York. It seemed that his route to the coveted island was not to be an Epicurean one. Coveted means wished for. Epicurean means related to fine food and drink. Some other way of entering limbo must be thought of. Limbo means a state of inactivity. At a corner of 6th Avenue, electric lights and cunningly displayed wares behind plate glass made a shop window conspicuous. Cunningly here means cleverly. Conspicuous means visible or noticeable. Soapy took a cobblestone and dashed it through the glass. People came running around the corner, a policeman in the lead. Soapy stood still with his hands in his pockets and smiled at the sight of brass buttons. "Where's the man that done that?" inquired the officer excitedly. "Don't you figure out that I might have had something to do with it?" said Soapy. Not without sarcasm, but friendly as one greets good fortune. The policeman's mind refused to accept Soapy even as a clue. Clue here means possibility. Men who smash windows do not remain to parley with the law's minions. Parley means converse. Minions means servants. They take to their heels. Take to their heels means run away. The policeman saw a man halfway down the block running to catch a car. With drawn club, he joined in the pursuit. Soapy, with disgust in his heart, loafed along, twice unsuccessful. On the opposite side of the street was a restaurant of no great pretensions. It catered to large appetites and modest purses. Its crockery and atmosphere were thick, its soup and napery thin. Into this place, Soapy took his accusive shoes and telltale trousers without challenge. At a table, he sat and consumed beefsteak, flapjacks, donuts, and pie. And then, to the waiter, he betrayed the fact that the minutest coin and himself were strangers. "Now, get busy and call a cop," said Soapy, "and don't keep a gentleman waiting." "No cop for yous," said the waiter, with a voice like buttercakes. Voice like buttercakes means a smooth voice, and an eye like the cherry in a Manhattan cocktail. "Hey, con." Con is short for conman or trickster. Neatly upon his left ear, on the callous pavement, two waiters pitched Soapy. He arose, joint by joint, as a carpenter's rule opens, and beat the dust from his clothes. Arrest seemed but a rosy dream. The island seemed very far away.
This video was a revision of the chapter, the second part of the story, and third part we will discuss in the next video. For till then, bye bye.